Hello and welcome to Fine is a Four-Letter Word. My guest today is Wendy LeBorgne. Welcome to the show, Wendy.
Thank you so much for having me, Lori. It is a pleasure to be here.
I am excited to get into this conversation. And as we were talking before I turned on record, I was saying that people are interested in how I meet my guests. And so just going to throw this out there right at the beginning so I don't forget that you and I were introduced by Mike Sackmary. And Mike was a previous guest on this show. He was episode 62, also known as season 2, episode 26, because we renumbered and we stopped doing seasons. This might be news to my listeners now because the first time I'm mentioning it, but we went back and renumbered from 1 to, I think you're episode 96 or 97. Well, check the numbers when it publishes. And anyway, many thanks to Mike for introducing us.
Yes, absolutely. And he and I met. I think he had seen my TED Talk and reached out, and I was like, sure, I'll be on your podcast. And then it grew from there. I think this idea of networking with people is so amazing. That's been one of my favorite things, is meeting new people from so many, many walks of life. It just makes the world interesting and exciting.
Yes, and it's fun. Like, we talk a lot about how this experience of life, what is life? Like, what's the meaning of life? And we can get into that more later too, but the whole idea for me is that it's an experience and that we're here to have fun.
And I'm always truly amazed at the amount of connections that you have with people that you really actually don't know. Like you and I on our pre-conversation, you're in the DC area. I was born in DC. Like that, just there's all of these connections that we never met each other before. And then boom, and we can continue to create community around conversation and what we do. And I think that is really cool.
It is. It definitely is. So speaking of creating community, because that's something that you do really well too, how did you, what were the values and beliefs that you were raised with? And was there something about that in your growing up years that contributed to your ability to do this now?
I think probably one of the biggest thing that was instilled in me from the time I was little, and part of it might be of my personality, but just this, I have just an internal drive to be the best that I can be. And that was kind of instilled in me by my parents as well. It's like, whether you are a ditch digger, whether you're a neurosurgeon, your goal is to be the best you that you can be in whatever that is. You work your hardest. Some days are good, some days are not good. But if you have left it all on the field, so to speak, I think that was huge for me. And that allows for I would say no regrets. I mean, I think there's always things we can change in what we do. Could we have done it differently? Would it have made a different outcome? But in that moment of time, in whatever moment of time it is, do you do the best job and are authentic to who you are and what you do? And that has really been something that was instilled in me, and hopefully I have instilled in my children as they, my son actually graduated from high school this weekend, and you're like, did you do enough? Is he ready to spread his wings and go in the world? So,
yeah, well, you do the best you can with the tools you have at the time. Yeah. And I really believe, and I say this to myself as well as to everybody who's listening, that the regrets part is like, you can't go back and change anything. Everything has worked out exactly as it was supposed to.
I believe that.
And moving forward, holding on to this idea that there are no wrong choices. There are no wrong decisions.
I love that. Yeah.
Whatever you decide will be the right thing.
And it is what it is in that moment of time, and it will guide a path forward. And I've had a lot of change in my professional life in the last couple of years, and what has been really interesting for me is to look at, again, all of these threads throughout my life that you don't recognize in the moment of time, but that actually kind of come full circle in some capacity, or someone you've met, or, oh my gosh, do you have this connection to be able to move this forward? And I don't think you can see that until hindsight. So regrets, good and bad, but also learning from experiences. And I don't always say learning from mistakes, because sometimes you learn good things from bad experiences and bad thing from good experiences. It can be flip side.
Yeah. You mentioned being the best you that you can be. And first it brings up, wasn't there like some Dr. Seuss story that was about that?
I know the places you will go. That's what's in the forefront of my brain at the moment. But I don't think it's the book. Yeah.
It sounds like a Dr. Seuss theme. But the other thing it brought up for me was there was a movie, and I just looked it up because I don't have the year off the top of my head, but it came out in 2006, called You, Me, and Dupree, and Owen Wilson was one of the main characters. It was Owen Wilson, Matt Dillon, Kate Hudson. Seth Rogen was in it, Michael Douglas. But Owen Wilson's character is like this total slacker who lives with his friends, like sleeps on their couch, and then decides he wants to become a motivational speaker. And he talks so it's crazy, stupid movie, but it's funny. But he talks in there at the very end when he's doing his presentation about you-ness, like being about being who you are and your you-ness.
I think that that's so important, but I also think we all have to recognize that hopefully you change and grow over time. And so I think where people get stuck sometimes, self-included, is am I my same self at whatever age I am, which we're not going to talk about, as I was 10 years ago, as I was 10 years before that, right? And so if there's one of my friends here, and he is a wonderful author, Todd Henry, has a book called Die Empty, and it is about, like, if you are not growing, you're dying, right? So what does that look like? It's a wonderful book. But just at the end of your life, like, have you done all of the things to fulfill what you're supposed to fulfill in this moment of time?
Yeah, I don't know if you could actually reach that point. Like, to be like, I've done everything possible that I wanted to, was here for, even if you are 150.
We don't know the timeline, right, on what it is. So I think in that moment of living the best life you can in each and every moment, in this crazy fast forward world, as you were like, YouTube and this and that and whatever, right, all of these things, I think it becomes so challenging at times to maintain presence in the moment. As I get older, to maintain that presence in the moment versus either thinking about what's coming or living in the past, right? What is happening now?
It's such a human thing. Like, that's what we do because we have that capability.
Absolutely.
Like, if you look at a cat or a dog, they probably aren't doing that because I don't know, as smart as my cats have been, do they have that cognitive ability?
Yeah.
And are they better off without it? Like, there are arguments that could be had that they are better off without that ability.
Yes. There's what do we say to our youngest son? We, if he's playing like baseball or whatever, we're like, you gotta have the memory of a goldfish, dude. Like, you have to. It's done. It's over. Like, memory of a goldfish. It's done. It's over. We're in the next moment. Because those are things we learn over time, right?
Yes, for sure. So, because the show is called "Fine" is a 4-letter word, tell me about the time, or a time, because many of us have more than one time. That you were stuck in a place where you said everything was fine, but it wasn't fine at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably in I call it BC, before COVID and then after COVID, right? But I was living in this very, very comfy life, and went from my undergrad, master's, PhD, great job, great family, great marriage, the all of the things. And then the company that I worked for had changed some leadership, and I knew that I was not probably morally or ethically aligned with some of the leadership in that company, but I wasn't really willing to change or modify, because I mean, I actually love what I do and still do. But I knew that that was probably maybe not the best fit in that moment. And it became very, very evident as the pandemic progressed. I was in a healthcare situation, and it was very challenging, and ended up making a pivot that I was super uncomfortable making, because I went from a very, very comfortable six-figure job to zero in 2 weeks, essentially. And so figuring that out, but that was probably the best move I've ever made in my life. So yeah.
Did you make that choice yourself, or was that choice made for you in terms of a layoff or something like that?
It was essentially made for me. Yeah.
Okay.
Which, as somebody who was kind of the head of household financially, from that standpoint, it was huge. It was, and as someone who's incredibly, I think there's a lot of women and probably a lot of men, but that my identity is very much wrapped up in my career. That was not just a shift in career. It was, who am I? What do I do now? What am I?
Yeah.
It was a very, very massive shift.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. But you had been thinking, like you already knew, you mentioned that you weren't aligned at
I
all.
knew
So,
that I
and
wasn't aligned, and I have always had, what's the next goal, what's the next thing, and I had been with this company for close to 25 years, and I had I'm not sure where my next goal was. So, I mean, I'm an author, I'm doing lectures outside of there, like all of the things. And it would have been a great, great, great situation, and then went in a very not great direction. So, yeah.
right, but you were saying that you were kind of out of alignment with their values and their
Yes.
morals, and so you knew you couldn't stay there, but you were afraid to make the move. And so
Right.
the universe, as often happens, did it for you.
He said, I am shutting this door for you. Thank you very much. Thank you for playing. Yes. And I am so fortunate and blessed to have a community around me as an individual that live outside of that world, to be able to provide some perspective, saying, this is not healthy. You can't stay in this situation. So yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that community. How did it come to be? How did you build that?
Oh my gosh. So there's a couple different arms of this. Like, I have this powerhouse women Bible study that we would get up literally 6 a.m. on Friday mornings and meet. I'm not sure God was awake at 6 a.m., but we were all there because this particular group of women are all these high power, like CEOs, attorneys, judges, physicians, like really, really amazing women that support each other. And one of the things I found, even in my own profession, is, and I don't know if this is just my profession or if it's across the board, but I have found that I generally align better with women who are in similar levels of leadership, but not in my direct field of study or field of work, versus just having people, because we are all kind of competing for the same jobs, if you will, if you're all in the same field. So everybody's had very similar experiences, but in different sectors. So it was really beneficial. And just constantly having that support knowing that what was said in the room would stay in the room regardless of who it was. So it was a very safe space, and just knowing that somebody had your back. And then I have this community of great friends that were just there for me and still are there for me every day. And just we are so lucky. So lucky. Friends and yeah, my faith for sure.
I asked that question because I often hear from people, I was going to say women, but it's really all genders, especially when they reach 40s and 50s, having difficulty finding new friends or making new connections.
Yeah.
And being able to build a community like that or a support system like that. And that's why I was curious where yours came from.
Yeah, and some of them are long-standing friends, like 20 plus year friends. But I will say that I am one of those people. I have a lot of acquaintances and very few close friendships, and those close friendships are huge. I do think it's challenging to kind of network and meet new people, but going back, my work was also my family, right? So when that was like having a divorce that you didn't actually ask for or want, and then nobody sees each other anymore, and you're like, oh my gosh, how does this work? What am I going to do? So having to put myself out there with friends, I started going to some networking groups eventually after the pandemic kind of did its thing. But yeah, because I don't think that social media they are acquaintances for the most part, right? Like,
Yeah.
what people know of me on social media is a digital footprint.
Right. Social media, people think they have connections, and you are connected to people. That doesn't mean you know them. And that's part of the challenge of living in the day and age that we do, is that so many people have so many connections online, but are at home by themselves lonely, because those aren't true friendships and deep connections.
Yeah. And I will say in the last probably 6 to 12 months, I've really cut back on my social media consumption and posting.
Same.
Because it's exhausting. Like, it's mentally exhausting. All of the things. I am ready. I am a people person, and I love Zoom, and I love the ability that we've gotten to do this, but I need to actually be with people in person, because to me that is part of community.
Right. And we've talked about this before on the show, about the difference between virtual connections and in-person connections. And there's an energy is ubiquitous. It doesn't matter where you are. You can feel someone's energy. However, it is different when you are in a room with somebody versus when you are, in a virtual room with somebody.
100%. And so as a voice pathologist, and as somebody who does hands-on work with patients and clients, that is one of the things that I can do a lot of therapy via telehealth. That human touch, that ability to create physical connection, number one, and also without getting like too woo-woo on the situation, but I'm trained
We're all good with woo-woo.
Right? I'm trained in myofascial release and some craniosacral work, but that requires actual touch and energy in some capacity, to feel the tissue under your skin, to know, okay, there is an area of restriction in their muscle, or there's muscle tension. I can't do that virtually.
Right.
And so I think that ability for sure is super duper important.
Yes. We're talking here about community, and I had a note written down from our first conversation. I have a note, and it has a star next to it, and that is that the root of communication is community.
It is. So the Latin root, the root word of communication is like communis, is at the end, and that actually means community, and you cannot do that in isolation. And it requires honestly, people being together, it is not ever meant, it was not ever meant to be in a virtual situation.
Yeah, right. Because think about how many years we have been living as humans in community without virtual. Like this virtual thing is only maybe the last 10 years.
Right, right. And even things such as I will almost rather have a phone conversation at times because we pick up more emotional cues without visual input than we do by having visual and audio combined. We can tell the only people that can effectively lie verbally that we can't tell in their voices as somebody who assesses voices, right?
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
my world. Are sociopaths and trained FBI agents who can do that. The rest of us are able to actually pick up cues of emotion, sadness, grief, happiness, lying, by listening to the sound of somebody's voice because it's hardwired from the brain. So it's very interesting. And just in communication, women's goals of communication historically, I mean, I'm talking back to caveman times, hunter-gatherers, the goal of communication for women was to create a relationship or to create community. The goal of communication in men is actually they use words to and language to get a job done. So even back to caveman times, cave people times, that's actually the role of communication.
Wow, that's so interesting about the audio piece without video. Like
Yes.
there have been many times that I would rather have a phone conversation, and I never knew that that's probably why. Like it
That's
just
part
is
of it.
easier. A lot of
is
times it's
easier.
just easier. Let's just go old school phone. And often people are like, yeah, let's do that. I'm tired of being on Zoom. And it's a better conversation.
100%. Yeah, I don't have the study name off the top of my head, but there was a study that they did, and I can send it to you later just so if somebody wants to look at it, they can.
Yeah, we can put it in show notes.
Right. So they basically took a couple of groups. They had one that was doing verbal only conversation, one that was verbal and visual, and one that was in complete darkness and you only had auditory cues. The listeners and watchers picked up the correct emotional context most accurately with auditory only.
Interesting.
Yep.
Interesting. So how did you talked about your communities helping support you when you were in the transitory place of moving from that job you'd been at for 20 something years to
Yep.
where you are now. What are the other tools? What other tools did you use, and how did you find your way? Especially given what you mentioned earlier, and I can completely relate to this, that job was your identity.
Right. For anybody out there that's gone through a pretty massive transition, I think it's okay to not be okay. I think that was one of the huge things that I had to learn. I am a super stubborn, strong, headstrong person who's crazy driven. So that was a moment to take.
That pretty
back
much
and go,
describes everyone who's listening. So yeah.
okay, good. So I'm not alone in the world in
No.
this. But I will say that it was a good, I'm not going to lie, 6 months to a year easily, because it was happening during the pandemic. So it was like no normal life anyway,
Right.
in the midst of all of this crazy, which I think has happened to so many people, right? And especially that. So there was some healing time, for sure. So there was a lot of self-reflection. I did a lot of journaling. I pretty much meditated and still do every day. That was not something I did on the regular basis prior to all of this. I would do it
Okay.
occasionally as needed.
Yep.
This became a part of my life every day. I had to learn to be quiet to listen. if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so that was a skill that I work and continue to work hard to build in listening, but I don't know. I hopefully some of your listeners out here can relate to this, but my mind goes like 100 miles a minute, and meditating for 5 minutes and just being quiet is hard for me, because I say I have monkey mind. It just goes constantly. But in order to find kind of this path forward, really being able to find quiet, to be able to listen and make that happen, and then create a plan. I work with a coach who has been really helpful in my world, and she's been amazing and had, interestingly, a very similar experience in her professional career. And so learning from that, and that has been huge in my life. And my husband has been a huge support. It's crazy because again, I think this is normal, right? You have pandemic happens, mom's trying to do, run a business from home in healthcare, migrating everything. My husband happens to be a music educator who is a percussionist. So we are now doing marching band online in the other room.
Wow.
I've got a sixth grader at the time, fifth and sixth grader, who needs direction as we're trying to learn, because you can't just put a fifth grader in front of a computer for 8 hours and hope that it all goes well. Mm-hmm. And I've got like a high schooler who is trying to learn online. So it was all of those things where we just said, what is happening? And so that took a lot of transition. But meditation was vital to even start my day, because that could not happen without some quiet before and after.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting to note that you mentioned turning to meditation in a time of kind of a crisis. Mm-hmm. And I think that's how a lot of us come to it. My listeners probably have heard me tell the story of how I was introduced to meditation when I was 10 years old. My mom took my brother and me to a meditation course, but then I didn't practice it regularly for 40-something years. And it wasn't until after my mom passed and I shut down my first business and was asking the same question of like, well, who am I now that I don't have that business? That's when I turned back to it on a regular basis. But years before that, I had a friend who was going through a divorce, and I'm like, meditation might be something that could help you. And so she started doing it, but I wasn't doing it. I just recommended it to her. It becomes, again, it's when you're ready, the right resources and teachers show up. But it's interesting that's when people most come to it. Is during that time. And I also wanted to mention, because you said you have a hard time sitting still, that there are active meditations. You don't have to sit still quietly.
Yes. It is a good thing for my brain to try to, and not just the sitting, but just, I try to make a difference between meditation, mindfulness, and manifestation. Mm-hmm. For me, like mindfulness is easier for me to do in motion. Meditation, I do try to park my butt in a chair. I have my meditation chair, and I try to sit there and be quiet. Don't disturb me. But yes. So much so that I actually, because I teach at a university, I was allowed to take X number of graduate. I don't want to go back to school, or, I want to continue to be a lifelong learner, but I don't think I need another degree at this point in my life. But they have a graduate certification in integrative medicine and integrative wellness from the medical school. And so I was like, all right. So I actually took a mindfulness course through the med school. I've taken traditional Chinese medicine. I think acupuncture is really cool. I think our bodies have an amazing way of healing themselves.
Absolutely.
I think our brain, I think the foods we eat, the things we eat and drink, all of those things, as I grow like my lemon balm in my backyard, like all of the things, it's fascinating to me, the chemistry that can exist in this world.
Yeah, it really is fascinating how how strong our minds are in terms of controlling our physical wellness.
Yes.
And again, this is knowledge that's been used by humans for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And then somehow in the past, I don't know, 100 or two, we kind of forgot about it, or we thought we knew better. Like we've evolved to know better, but it still, yes, there are places for, what do you call it now? Like Western medicine.
Well, yeah, I think that there's got to be that marrying between preventative wellness and crisis management, right? Like
yes.
In Western society, we often live in crisis management. And do not get me wrong. Like if I'm in a car accident, if I have cancer, if I have those things, I want traditional Western medicine. But I do think that we can do a lot for ourselves mentally, physically, emotionally to support well-being, to minimize the tipping point into being unhealthy. Because again, that my life has been evaluating and treating vocal injury all the way from like overuse to laryngeal cancers. So that's been a thing.
Yeah. And now that you have gotten more into using those techniques, meditation and those things, are you bringing more of that into your practice than you ever have before?
What's interesting is I had brought it into my practice a long time ago. I was trained in myofascial release probably 10 to 12 years ago. So I've used hands-on for a long time. Again, being super left-brained, I sort of want to know the why behind what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And so I think my more recent education, if you will, has been a deeper dive for myself. And to continue to grow and learn, like the herbal supplements and the herbal stuff, chemistry has always been interesting, but how do you combine turmeric with lycopenes to get the most benefit? It's not just about green tea or turmeric. It's how are these things combined to create a positive chemistry? And just like with Western medicine, with every benefit, there is a risk. And that is the same thing in like herbs and herbal supplements. And I think it's really important that people actually know that too. So that's how I've kind of incorporated it, because I live in a world of high level professional vocal athletes. So they'll come in and they'll have done like tea with honey and lemon, or cayenne pepper in apple cider vinegar for acid reflux. I'm like, what made you think this was a good idea? Where did this come from? Because yes, some of these things may be beneficial. However, we know that this can actually burn your esophagus. So you doing that might not be your best choice. But there are things. It's really interesting.
It is interesting. And it's interesting to me that you have this interest and are combining it with what you're doing to help your clients even more. Like it's a differentiating factor for you, I would think.
Yeah, and I think if you're going to do it, let's do it in the healthiest, safest way possible. Again, no judgment, but like if you're going to smoke marijuana, what is the least detrimental way you can do that for your vocal cords if you're a professional singer? Is it potentially better to ingest it, doing it in a bong? Like if you're going to do it, let's talk about how to do it in the most healthful way, because I can only give you choices. I'm not going to be there with you. So let me provide the choices for you that are going to exist if you're going to choose to engage in this activity. Just kind of like safe sex. It's like, you're going to do it. Here's a safer way to make it happen.
Yeah, exactly. Educating, so they can make educated choices.
For themselves. Yes.
Yeah.
My job is not to judge. It's to provide you with information to be able to make appropriate decisions for what's best for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. This has been such a good conversation. Like I feel energized.
But it was all good.
I know, but it went exactly where it was supposed to go. I
love it.
Before we leave it, I have my two questions. My one last question of you're all about music. and
I know.
vocals. And so I'm super curious to hear your answer to what your hype song is.
So it depends on what I'm going in for, right? Like I told you, I was like, I have a whole Spotify playlist
Yes.
of hype songs, right? I sent you a list of some. I would say one of my favorites is from oh my gosh, Greatest Showman,
Oh,
which is
yeah.
the one that I sent to you. This Is Me.
Uh-huh.
I would encourage your listeners to watch the YouTube link potentially I sent you, which is in a rehearsal room of the it's not from the cast album. This is what happened in that rehearsal room. This is raw footage of that, and it is inspiring and moving. And so I love the mixed and edited version, but that version to me is huge. I love Broken and Beautiful by Kelly Clarkson. That is a great pump up song. And then there's one from Zootopia that's also on there that I think I wrote. It's Birds Don't Just Fly, They Fall Down and Get Up Again, which is always a super fun song too.
All right. I got to go listen to that one because I'm not familiar.
Yes.
Cool.
So, I have a plethora, like legit a 2 hour.
Oh yeah, so do I. So do I. I know that question for me is really difficult, but I love asking it of other people too, because right, when you're into music and you love all kinds of music genres and everything,
Yes.
like being asked to pick one is virtually impossible, but it is interesting. It's an interesting
Yeah.
exercise.
100%. So yes, I have lists for what I need in that moment of time.
Yeah. Yeah, love it. All right. And then lastly, if people want to continue this conversation with you, where's the best place for them to find you?
Probably my website, which is www.drwendyvoice.com. There's a contact me form on there, so those come directly to me. I get to filter through those. So if you want to reach out to me, that's the best place you can find me. You can find me on Instagram at Dr. Wendy Voice, and LinkedIn at Dr. Wendy Voice. So I'm there as well.
Cool.
And my TED Talk, if you go watch it, yay.
Yes. All right.
We'll put over 1 million views for me.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put a link to all of that in the show notes to make it easy for people to find you then.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me today on Fine is a Four-Letter Word, Wendy.
Lori, it has been my pleasure, and you are so easy to talk to. Thank you.